Archive libraries can provide a rich and often hidden resource base for both the primary and secondary curriculum. There are over 2,000 located across England and Wales, with each containing unique and valuable collections which can't always be found in textbooks or on the internet. The collection at Birmingham City Archives dates from the 14th century and is regularly utilised by local schools to explore a wide range of subjects.
Obviously, Birmingham being an industrial city, we've got so many connections with kind of industrial records and so on. So there's a whole kind of science area, wide photographic collection as well, which we've used in media and arts projects. We've used maps which would relate to geography curriculum. I think there's not really a bit of the curriculum that we'd struggle with, to be honest.
This programme looks at how one school has started to make the most of this local resource following an initial contact from the archive itself.
Nikki got in touch with us from Birmingham City Archives and they wanted to do a project about Quinton and looking at old photographs. What we wanted to use is primary source material. They then wanted to increase that link by looking at archives in the classroom. And so they got in touch with us about something that was going to be appropriate, and we thought slavery, the Atlantic slave trade and its link with Birmingham would be a good thing.
It's a real issue for schools to bring children out, and it can also be quite difficult for us to accommodate 30 children up here because we're quite a kind of small area. So it's great for us to be able to take material out and give children just a kind of taster of the sort of material that we've got.
It's easier for 3 people to come and visit us than to take a whole group of people out to the library. And if you're wanting to cover more than one class, obviously logistically it's easier. It's also quite nice to have people come into the school.
So Martin Phillips and the archive team developed an outreach session for his Year 8 history class.
The theme that we're going to be looking at is all connected with the Atlantic slave trade. It's all about Birmingham's link with that slave trade, and you're going to be looking at archive work. The people taking the session are Nikki, Rachel and Sian, who come from the Birmingham City Archives Department.
We started off by just giving the children an overview of the archives and what kind of collections that we held and why we might preserve particular collections and what constituted as an archive.
If you keep a diary, or you type stuff into your PC, or you've got letters that people have sent you, or birthday cards, or anything of that sort, those are actually part of your own family archives. And basically what we do is very much the same, except we do it for the whole of the city of Birmingham.
What we wanted to do was just to kind of give them an idea of the sort of time period that we spanned, and also that archives weren't just kind of dusty old documents, that they might include photographs. So we had a collection of copies of photographs from the archives, and we got the children to look at those photographs and ask questions of them, with the idea that the sorts of questions they asked of the photographs, kind of like who had taken it, where did it come from, what could you tell from the photograph, that they would be the same questions that they could then apply to the documents that they would look at later on.
It does look old.
Okay, what clues are you looking at to think about how old it is? The uniform, that's really good. The clothing, what they're wearing, that makes a difference. You're right, chalkboards as well. I know you've still got a chalkboard, but it's quite unusual actually, isn't it?
Times when... Got the chalkboard all around the classroom. Like, all white people in it, so then that's probably when...
Right, okay, yeah, that's a good point as well.
I think the warm-up was very good because it got them talking, and it meant that they were talking before they actually got to the things that we really wanted to investigate.
You've looked at what they're wearing, what their desks are like, how the classroom is set up, what lesson they're doing, what their pencil cases are like. All those different things will help you give some clues about what you can find out from a photograph.
We had a planning meeting where she actually went through the session and showed us some of the sources that were going to be used today.
He'd already been into the archives and looked at some of the material, and then I went to see him at school and we just talked through kind of logistics in terms of numbers and how many we could fit in, and also then the sorts of the topics that they were looking at and the kind of level of the children in terms of what they could hope to get out of the material that we were bringing in, which gave us an idea of the amount of material to take in so we didn't kind of overwhelm them.
Archivists are really keen to work with schools and really keen to have their collections and resources used by students. Many archives now have got catalogues of their collections and they have put them online so that teachers can look at what is available before they get in contact with the archivist when they're just starting to think about how they might use these collections to plan a session.
It does take quite a bit of time to actually set up something like this, to be quite honest. But ultimately I think it pays off because we can use it quite simply again next time, and it becomes easier. And I think the more you see one another, the more comfortable you are at saying where things went wrong and where it needs to be improved.
I think there's some really good questions came out of doing that activity. You asked a lot of good questions and you got a lot of detail from looking very closely. So if when we go on to the next activity looking at the sources relating to slavery, if you just bear those questions in mind that you were asking of the photographs and really look for the detail, because I think you got a lot of kind of initial ideas with the photographs, and then as you focused in on the detail you got a lot more out of it. We divided the children into 3 groups, and that makes sense for us in terms of looking at archival material, because obviously it's all quite kind of small scale, so they need to be able to get in there and actually look at it. And I think that's a big part of maintaining their interest, is making sure that in some ways they can handle the material and really look closely at it so that they can transcribe, decipher handwriting and so on.
I think it would waste time to make notes, and I think because if they were making notes they'd be looking for right answers. I think writing is greatly assisted by talking. So we can always follow it up in another lesson with a piece of writing, but I think the writing wasn't going to assist the learning, so it would have had limited value in this particular lesson.
It says relief.
That's right, well done, absolutely, that's the key word. Why do you think they would have produced it?
Trying to get the point across to some British, the white people, see what happens when the black people are getting caught.
Okay, that's really good, they're absolutely right. This is like, so when they say it's an album, so like we think of albums as like being a photograph album, don't we? But this is like an album of drawings that perhaps these people might take around and show to other people.
I think it adds to the experience of studying history if other people come in and they come from somewhere else, they're specialists, and I think that's always very, very important. So I wouldn't simply take the resources and do it myself. I like the idea that we're getting guests into the classroom.
We never here see the school as an island. We see the school as an organisation that needs to reach out into the community, or as the children call them, real people. They don't often see teachers as real people.
But he would have been the highest paid member of the ship. They needed a captain.
We have what we call a no-blame culture here. So we encourage people to try things, and sometimes they don't work, sometimes they do. But if you don't take the risks and you don't try, you don't create anything new and exciting.
The thing that really appeals is that the pupils can get their hands, not necessarily literally, but they can actually see a real document from the past. All of the documents that we've seen today could easily be seen in textbooks, and one of them actually is, and one of them I've actually used before. But when you actually see a document on its own in isolation, I think it takes on a greater value. I also think that there's a higher level of thinking that goes on about one source rather than flicking from one source to another.
Well, I think they're useful because when we do this in school, we now know that we can understand this topic a lot more.
Yeah, because it really helps you as it being old and like really from the heart what people saying about slave trade and how much they care about it.
It like helps us see a bit more clearly how it was like. Because I've got like that sort of colour in me, it's like I could go home and talk to my dad about it and my dad would be all interested. And so like I've got someone to talk to it about, and then I get to find out more things about like where my granddad come from and everything.
Okay, I will round it up now. You have worked exceptionally hard. You may not have done any physical writing, but your thinking, your listening and your understanding, and the sophistication with which the levels of thinking that you've been doing has actually been very, very impressive. Because you come into the room, some of you thinking, what's this about? And you're leaving it having looked at primary source material that was actually written at that time about the very trade that we're looking at.
Spurred on by the session in the classroom, and despite the difficulties of organising a trip out of school, Martin decided to take the class into the library to see what else the archives had to offer.
I think first of all they'll see what the higher part of the library looks like. They may have been at the library, some of them won't have been, most of them will have walked past it 100 times. The first thing they'll do is see the scale of the library and the scale of the information present, which they can then see that they can use any time in later life.
I think it gave them a bit of context for what they'd seen last week. So they'd seen these documents and then they could kind of see that, you know, it came as part of a much, much bigger collection. I think they really enjoyed looking at the conservation practices and how that operated. And I think they just had really developed in terms of their confidence of looking at documents. So they were much more open to asking questions of what was there in front of them, wanting to see more and making these connections between documents.
A lot of people frame their photographs, and this is an early photograph taken of people training for the First World War. And what's happened with this one is that it was in a frame and then it got damp and then somebody dropped the frame and it broke. And what's happened here is that the images of the photograph, maybe you can see that, have actually stuck onto the glass and left white patches.
Last week you gave me some ideas about the kinds of things that you'd like to look at as an extension to what we did last week. So we've got things out that relate to that.
So he's writing to somebody that he knows well, he's keeping a diary, and what do we know that he does? What's he done every day so far?
Went to dinner with someone.
He's went to dinner with
I
somebody.
think the first thing that they picked up was questioning. Rather than just staring at a picture and seeing what came out of it, is they learned that they had to ask a series of questions. I think the second thing that they learned was to be patient with the source. So they were reading manuscripts that were written in a very different style of handwriting from that which they would be used to. And I felt that what they got used to doing was really examining and almost translating something from the past.
That's it, well done. The material can be slightly more complex as the children get older, but in general, a lot of the same material works. A lot of material that's kind of quite visually stimulating and interesting is good. It's more about the kind of questions that you can ask of the material, so it's more about that sort of like what kind of level might they be able to go up to in terms of what could they find out about that document.
Matthew Bolton was a very influential man. What you've been doing is reading an original letter by one of the most important people that you actually would hear about from this city. We do a lot more next year about this person. So
we want to make archives accessible to people that don't normally come to the archives. So I think if we ask teachers to get in touch with us and have a look at the kind of material that we've got, I think that's the best starting point really for them to have some idea of the sorts of different collections that we've got and how much material we've got which will kind of feed into their everyday lessons.
In any archive you will find photographs, you will find maps, you'll find plans, you'll find inventories, you'll find birth certificates, you'll find a whole range of resources that can be used to support the teaching of history, geography, maths, art, drama. You name it, the archives can support it.
They still keep them on the shelves after over 100 years probably.
We've learned a lot about how the archives are kept. We've looked at how archive material is restored and repaired, and you've also consolidated your understanding of what the slave trade was about, how it affected Birmingham, and how archives can be used to give us evidence.
I think we began with not really knowing what the other wanted, what our pupils could get out of what they were offering, and I think initially it took quite a while. What I've learned is that I think that it's a resource that I should have tapped into a few years ago really, and that what I've also learned is if you invest a little bit of time in the planning, you get a lot more back, and that it can become a regular event. I've also learned that the archive team is very, very, very willing to look for something that we want and bring it in. And I suppose what I've learned is that really I should have done this years ago.